I see trade as this thing that opens up not just a richer world, but a world that is more interactive, where people have to start learning what each other is like. I mean, the first American basketball or football team to actually take a black American player was owned by one of the biggest racists in America. But he did it because he made money. And he looked past his prejudices, as bad as they were, because he could actually profit. So this is, we keep saying profit's a dirty word, but women start getting into the community and earning because profit. Minorities because of profit. Profit is maligned by those who are already there and don't want competition.
Now, my show is an intelligence test. Okay? So, if you watch my show, I know that you're smart. And that's because stupid people don't understand my show. And my show looks like nonsense from a crazy person. So, if you can understand my show, I know you're smart. What matters in Bitcoin is people.
How close can you get to someone? And as we get more connected in this world, the distance becomes smaller. And that distance is important. The smaller the distance, the more connected we are, the closer we are to everyone.
If we have an intelligence test and we know who's smart and who's dumb, that means the smart people can congregate together.
Connectivity in Bitcoin is incentivized.
And I first got interested in Craig Wright because I know that he watches my show. The way I know he watches my show is that he sometimes transmits my messages. So here's the first example that I found. If you watch an episode of my show that came out the same day, he's saying something very similar to something I said on my show. But it's kind of like... it's kind of digested for the masses. So, I know he's watching. Which means I know that he's smart. Now, in Bitcoin, it really is about understanding Bitcoin. Okay, and in order to understand Bitcoin, you have to be like a theoretical physicist. So, like when I first read A Brief History of Time, I didn't really know physics. And I remember reading something like, all this seems fairly straightforward, but the remarkable fact is that there are particles that do not look the same if one turns them through just one revolution. You have to turn them through 2 complete revolutions. Such particles are said to have spin 1/2. What? So later, when I learned physics, I figured out that this is like a terrible way of explaining spinners.
Something that is not infinite, but unbounded. Now, in a hypothetical computer, the concept of saying it's not Turing complete because it can't compute an infinite number, it's rather crazy when you think about it, because you can't ever compute an infinite number.
So Craig Wright is like Stephen Hawking.
And this is the key at the heart of this. A Turing complete machine is a machine that can compute any computable number.
I knew that that is very close to a real definition of Turing completeness, right? So I know that he knows what Turing completeness is, but somebody who is listening would not know what Turing completeness is. There are interests in Bitcoin that have reason to lie about Bitcoin, right? It is your responsibility to understand Bitcoin, okay? And so if somebody is talking nonsense about Bitcoin, it's other people's responsibility to recognize that as nonsense.
There is no split. You split, we bankrupt you. This is how Bitcoin works. If you don't like it, stiff.
So why do you do an intelligence test? Because
connectivity in Bitcoin is incentivized.
So if you know more and you are able to perform intelligence tests, you can use that to figure out who to be connected to. Because you can figure out who is smart, and you want to be connected to the smart people.
a serious large-scale miner will spend well over $100 million setting up a system right now. And the concept that those miners are going to spend to get a little tiny bit of profit, to do something like a selfish mining attack, to take a bribe for a double spend, that is just asinine. If you think about it for a second, people talk about the miner could take a small percentage of a sale to include a double spent transaction. So say we have our 10% miner, someone who owns 10% of the total hash rate. They've probably spent for that amount between $75 and $100 million in infrastructure. Infrastructure that has a usable lifespan of maybe 18 months to 2 years. They have that period to not only regain, but to totally replace their inventory, their capital. So that's a lot of money they have to earn and replace. So let's start thinking about what that means. To be successful, that miner needs to have a robust ecosystem. The value of the coin in market is most secure, is highest, and will rise when people know that it's safe. So if that miner starts doing things like taking small bribes to help someone steal a coffee, that miner is going to actually undercut their own incentives.
Okay, now that was the important part of the video, the part that we just heard. If everybody understood that, that would be a lot better. That would be a lot better for everyone. Okay? But how do you convince people? How do you get people to see that that's what's important? Okay, so usually I have to think a long time before I really know how to explain something, right? That doesn't mean I don't already know it. It's hard to communicate.
A Turing-complete machine is a machine that can compute any computable number.
So something like this can function as an intelligence test because you can recognize that it's like the Stephen Hawking version of Turing completeness, or you can say that it is the ravings of a crazy person. See, it's your responsibility to know what Turing completeness is. If you want to know, go outside of Bitcoin, read a computer science book. Okay? It is your responsibility to know what is important. So there's another thing in Bitcoin that I call the know-it-all competition. And this is something that affects people who want to be prominent in Bitcoin. People who want to be prominent but don't understand how, I should say. Because someone who is going around revealing what they know anytime anybody bugs them about it isn't someone who's strategizing. So the know-it-all competition means that people have to prove their knowledge all the time in order to be prominent in Bitcoin. And that is bullshit, and people who believe in the know-it-all competition don't understand Bitcoin. So one of the things I do is show a lot of contempt for the know-it-all competition. And if people ask me to prove that I know something, I make a joke or something. See, that to somebody who knows that the know-it-all competition is bullshit, that is a sign that I also know that it's bullshit. Okay? But it is not. It's not something that everybody understands. It's something that reveals who is thinking and who isn't. So that's one thing that I like about Craig Wright, is that he fails the know-it-all competition. And in fact, he goes further because he makes ridiculous claims about himself, which he then refuses to back up, claims that people would be curious about.
The history, my finances, all the rest. But really, how would you feel if I came up to you and said, excuse me, what's your credit card debt at the moment? How much is your home loan? How much are you earning? What are you worth? How much did you spend on entertainment? Do I have a valid reason to ask any of that? I know people want to know these things. I don't care. And no, I know what people say about signing things. And the blog post I released didn't make any promises. The Sartre piece didn't make any promises there. I said, I know how to, I know everything, and I'm not going to give you any answers.
So I saw a post on RBTC, and I tried to find it again, but I couldn't. So maybe someone will be able to point me to it eventually. But essentially, it was a nitpick of Craig Wright. It was like a point-by-point rebuttal of the video that I just showed you clips from. And so what I realized then is that Amory has time to do point-by-point rebuttals. In other words, he has a lot of time to attempt to pass the know-it-all competition. So this was the moment when I was like, clearly Craig Wright's understanding of Bitcoin is light years beyond Amory's, because here is Amory, a person who presumably would want miners to adopt his scaling plan, who is sort of doing a takedown of a miner on Reddit. So he's talking to people on Reddit and trying to win points with them, trying to win the know-it-all competition, and the people on Reddit are ultimately people who don't matter. So he's trying to be popular with people who don't matter, and he's kind of not treating somebody who does matter like someone who he would like to convince that his scaling plan is better. And also, he didn't seem to see that that Craig Wright knew what a Turing machine is. So here's me thinking as an investor, thinking like, what is going to convince me to split old UTXOs to sell BTC for BCH, right? And certainly not a developer who has no idea who his audience is, because to me that was the big problem that we had with BTC.
The best answer to corruption is sunshine.
If you want to make this global, then you have to engage globally.
So Craig Wright is also looking around to see who is thinking.
Connectivity in Bitcoin is incentivized.
So I started thinking about what is nchain. Okay? What is the company? Well, they're miners, right?
A lot of money they have to earn and replace. So let's start thinking about what that means.
And they want to get transaction fees. Okay? So how do we get transaction fees?
I see trade as this thing that opens up not just a richer world, but a world that is more interactive, where people have to start learning what each other is like.
You split, we bankrupt you. This is how Bitcoin works.
So I've been saying we need a brain, right? That was what my last episode was about. And I was kind of imagining like a Hayekian spontaneous order kind of thing. So what I wasn't thinking about was how much money mining actually attracts.
A serious large-scale miner will spend well over $100 million setting up a system right now.
The miners have the most immediate need to understand Bitcoin, the economic system.
They have that period to not only regain, but to totally replace their inventory, their capital. So that's a lot of money they have to earn and replace.
Now I'm seeing that I really should have got into mining a lot earlier, because there are whole new levels to strategy here that I hadn't really understood. So I had always said, of course, let the miners figure stuff out, because they have the immediate need to be profitable. So they have to think about this stuff. And unfortunately, Bitcoin has never been miner controlled. So what I can do with my intelligence test is sort of collect people who are thinking, and then I just have to I have to leave the other people alone, right? But what can you do with mining? If you can perform intelligence tests with the other miners, you can put the dumb ones out of business.
You split, we bankrupt you.
Right? Because there is only so much total hashing power, and the miners who are smarter can figure out how to assume the better position to get a little bit more profit.
Women start getting into the community and earning because profit. Minorities because of profit. Profit is maligned by those who are already there and don't want competition.
So I think that nchain is basically an objectivist company. So their whole business model is what is in our own interest.
Let's start thinking about what that means.
I think that nchain is just a mining operation that has understood its own interest better than any other mining operation. And in order to know that, you just need an arbitrary big brain that can think about anything. I think nchain is mining plus the brain. Okay? They are the brain. They are just being the brain. And what do you get if you have the biggest brain?
A world that is more interactive, where people have to start learning what each other is like.
You split, we bankrupt you.
So one thing you can do is perform intelligence tests. And you can use that to find who is thinking. So I do intelligence tests, they do intelligence tests. And another thing you can do is hypnosis, right? Because if somebody is smart enough to be able to do an intelligence test, then they can trick you. They can hypnotize you. So you have to watch my show because you know I'm smarter. Because I do the best intelligence tests. See? So nchain is going to do that to the world.
It's rather crazy when you think about it.
I saw the greatest intelligence test that I have ever seen in Bitcoin the other day. And that was this presentation by Jimmy Nguyen.
And so we need big blocks, and we need them now. And there is an economic reason for that, especially for miners, to protect miner revenue. And miner revenue is important because miners have to be profitable in order to be incentivized to provide the computing power that runs the network and provides its security. If they're not profitable, they leave.
But when I saw him, the first thing that I thought was, why is this person talking to Bitcoiners?
Move away from being an environment where the different protocol developer groups had so much influence and sway over what happened with a protocol and network that is really supported by the money as well as the skin in the game of miners such as CoinGeek. And that is a key part of our vision for Bitcoin SV, restoring and giving to miners the choice and voice in what happens with this network.
This guy can communicate Bitcoin to the world. Okay? So
the Bitcoin Cash network needs to scale big and needs to scale big quickly.
It's stuff everybody in Bitcoin Cash agrees on.
It never was allowed to fully flourish in its original design.
And everything in it is related to the bottom line.
Stability is so key for the big businesses of the world to use Bitcoin Cash so that it will grow.
And he's saying things that some kind of normal person outside of Bitcoin would know is not bullshit.
And that's important for big businesses because they want to create projects on a foundation that is solid rock, not sand. It shouldn't be moving all the time because otherwise the expense and time necessary to take a project or an application from idea to completion and release into the marketplace gets far more complicated.
The talk is at kind of a lower intelligence level. Okay? So I was a little bit patronized by it.
Our message is simple. It's time for Bitcoin to grow up.
So he's talking to you like he's talking to children.
It never really hits a scaling ceiling. So even at the beginning of Bitcoin, the Satoshi vision was scale bigger than the Visa credit card system, scale worldwide.
Okay, but if he was facing outside, normal businessmen from outside would be thinking, I think Bitcoin is ready, because this person looks normal and he is clearly not spouting bullshit.
If we can get this restored to the original protocol and allow it to scale big, then it's easier. Nobody wants disagreements every 6 months. Developer groups don't, the miners don't, the businesses that operate on Bitcoin Cash do not. And so it is far simpler and more conducive of a big enterprise approach to get to a stable protocol.
So what's the intelligence test? What are you not noticing if you want to go against the SV plan?
Storing and giving to miners the choice and voice in what happens with this network.
They have that period to not only regain, but to totally replace their inventory, their capital. So that's a lot of money they have to earn and replace.
Scale big.
You split, we bankrupt you.
It's time for Bitcoin to grow up.
Let's start thinking about what that means.
Money, as well as the skin in the game of miners such as CoinGeek. And that is a key part.
If you want to make this global, then you have to engage globally.
And Bitcoin is a cooperative system, right? And they're an objectivist company. So they've learned to present you with your own interest.
Scale big.
And they've also thought about how to punish other miners who don't go along with them.
Restoring and giving to miners the choice and voice in what happens with this network.
You split, we bankrupt you.
These guys are showing everyone that they have the biggest brain. And Bitcoin is a cooperative system. They're telling us how to cooperate. Who doesn't want to listen? Someone who doesn't know his own interest. Someone who doesn't notice when the bar has been raised.
A protocol, a network that is really supported by the money as well as the skin in the game of miners.
This is a company that has learned diplomacy as part of its business model.
It's easier. Nobody wants disagreements every 6 months. Developer groups don't, the miners don't, the businesses that operate on Bitcoin Cash do not. Restoring and giving to miners the choice and voice in what happens with this network.
You split, we bankrupt you.
So why wouldn't you go along with their plan?
Connectivity in Bitcoin is incentivized.
If somebody knows how to present everyone with their own interest in the cooperative system that is Bitcoin, where are they going to be?
Connectivity in Bitcoin is incentivized.
What can you do with people who fail the intelligence test? Well, you can ignore them in the next round, because you know they're on their way out.
You split, we bankrupt you.
How much hashing power do they have? Well, it doesn't matter, because all miners have to start thinking about this now. All miners have to think about Bitcoin, the economic system. All miners have to think about getting transaction fees. All miners have to think about how to fight other miners, because they have to think about, what does nchain really know?
Connectivity in Bitcoin is incentivized.
How do you get to know what nchain knows? How do you learn from nchain?
Storing and giving to miners the choice and voice in what happens with this network.
All you have to do is accept something that is clearly in your own interest.
Therefore, we need to begin the scaling process massively now in order for miners to maintain and grow their profitability. We cannot wait.
Who do you want to join with? The people who don't know their own interest and therefore don't want to cooperate, or the people who do?
Connectivity in Bitcoin is incentivized.
So they can do intelligence tests and they can do hypnosis. So what else can they do? Well, to me, it seems like the people at nchain truly understand Bitcoin. I normally tell people that nobody is a Bitcoin expert and everybody is constantly learning about Bitcoin. And of course, I believe that Craig Wright is constantly learning about Bitcoin himself. But to me, he seems like he could be the first real Bitcoin expert. But not only does Craig Wright understand Bitcoin economically, but he also has a very deep intuition about it, which I know because he knows a similar trick to one I have been using. When the cult formed and filled up all of Bitcoin with retarded ideas, we needed to build a new network.
Connectivity in Bitcoin is incentivized.
What my thinking was, well, what do? I don't know who to talk to. I don't know who is thinking. That's what I wanted to know. And I knew we needed to build a network. And I had this idea that I would be at the center of the network, because I had the best understanding of Bitcoin, so I should be at the center of the network. That was my idea. So how do you do that? Well, you put on antlers, okay? You use a costly signal that is difficult to ignore. So, so proof of work is found in nature, right? Proof of work is everywhere in nature. Example, the bucks are all in competition with one another, so they have to be efficient, right? Because they're in competition. So it's impossible for any of them to spend too much resources on growing antlers, right? Because they don't have lots of leftover. Because they have to be efficient, right? So the antlers are a costly signal, and they are honest, and they correctly tell you how strong the buck is. Because if the buck wasn't strong enough, he couldn't grow antlers that big. So the way you do this to build the network is you show that you don't need friends, because friends are what you really need in the network. Those are the most important thing. So if you show that you don't need friends, that is a sign that you get friends easily. And what's important, like what makes somebody valuable that would make them win friends easily? Well, an understanding of how Bitcoin works. Because if you know how Bitcoin works, you can choose appropriate actions. And if you don't, then you're much more confused. My show is very demanding on the audience. Not only does it require a high level of intelligence, but it's quite demanding on your attention. And it's not as exciting as Bitcoin is. You have to be willing to be calm, and sometimes you have to listen to me drone on for a while without getting to the point. And sometimes I can act like a horror monster. So it's basically negging. It's like negging the audience.
Aren't you going to say hello?
Connectivity in Bitcoin is incentivized.
Most people in Bitcoin need allies more than I do. You know that you can't afford not to listen. So I knew how Bitcoin works. So I could see that Craig Wright also knew that he had to build the network. And he was using the same trick I was to show that he understood Bitcoin, and to show that he knew he was going to be at the center of the network. Because he would like do an entire talk that was like complete nonsense, and there would be like one sentence right in the middle.
Connectivity in Bitcoin is incentivized.
So Craig Wright was acting like a buck with really big antlers. So I know that costly signals are honest, and so I knew that I would have to check out Craig Wright. And I was concerned because I was thinking, is he Mircea Popescu again? Now, Mircea Popescu, he was the original Bitcoin cult leader. And he was one of the first people who really made me want to think about Bitcoin in new ways. You know, my friends and I always thought he was very funny, and we liked him a lot, but he is also a cult leader. He had his group, and he told the people in it that they were the elite. They were the elite of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin was the elite of the world. And I could see how the people around him would get twisted. And it happened because of this lure that he gave them about being the elite. And that was the idea behind MPEX having a constant 30 Bitcoin price to register, regardless of what value this 30 Bitcoins had in dollars. So originally, the amount 30 Bitcoins would have been very cheap, whereas now, most people couldn't afford it. See, that's the idea. Only the people who can get into MPEX are the elite of Bitcoin, regardless of what size Bitcoin has. They're always the elite of Bitcoin. And when I first saw MPEX, I was like, that is so stupid. Why would you do that? But when I actually thought about what he was up to, I was like, I need to understand Bitcoin a little bit better. Mircea Popescu was the first person who I ever heard say that the block size needs to be small. And I think this has to do with his idea that Bitcoin would be for a new elite of the world. So his idea was that MPEX was going to be like the elite of the elite. And you could only get in if you had 30 Bitcoins. Now, Mircea was the inspiration for my study of religion, which I have used in the episodes of my show, because I watched people around him turn into cult members, and there was one person in particular who was called Bitcoin Pete, and his blog is now at contravex.com, I think. And I watched his personality change into a pathetic Mircea clone as he interacted more and more with this group. And seeing this really distressed me a lot. So his ideas affected me over time, and they affected Bitcoin over time. The core cult that showed up later is kind of like a stupid version of his cult. So his ideas eventually were transformed into a more popular form and took over Bitcoin. And something like that happened to me too, because I invented Bitcoin maximalism, and I was not thinking about the consequences, because I wasn't thinking about Bitcoin being like some kind of liquid consciousness. And I think that for Mircea, the small block size has to do with his concept that Bitcoin is for the elite, because he didn't just want to be the elite of Bitcoin. He also wanted Bitcoin to be for the elite of the world. So it's not for the masses. So keeping the block size small and making sure that there's a giant price for each transaction That was his vision of Bitcoin. And so I thought that this was stupid because Bitcoin being for an elite is inconsistent with Bitcoin having the maximal value. Bitcoin is only for the Illuminati, and other people can't use it. Well, I mean, it would just be worth more if everybody else had some too, right? So wanting Bitcoin to be for the elite is like wanting to be in the upper caste more than you want to be rich. And I was like, nobody would be that stupid. However, I later saw that many people acted like they preferred to be popular over being rich. That, to me, that's what the entire BTC core cult was. It was a popularity contest that had everything to do with how close you are to the core devs, and nothing to do with making Bitcoin more valuable. They're very interested in one another's position, and the value of that position is how close it is to the core developers. And in Murch's case, it was how close are you to him, right? But in the BTC cult, it's how close are you to the core developers. Posto, because they would get mad at you for having an opinion if you weren't high up in the hierarchy. And so, so stupid, because this is also inconsistent with getting rich, okay? No hierarchy that excludes people is better at thinking than everybody thinking together, okay? Another time that Craig Wright transmitted one of my messages. Now, this one is a little bit more ambiguous, but there was this amazing article that he wrote called A Call to Arms, which you should all read because it's fantastic, and he transmitted one of my messages in it. And this paragraph here looks like he watched my episode Strategy in the Core Cache Conflict and kind of summarized the whole thing in one paragraph. And here he admitted that this was in fact possible. And here he admitted that this is and here he admitted that it is possible that this is what he did. But it doesn't matter, because it shows me that he knows what's important. It doesn't matter if he copied it from me. To me, if you are saying something that I'm saying, that shows you know what's important, right? So to me, Craig Wright really looked like the person that I was looking for here. Now, another thing that Craig Wright did in this article was he said, "Compete with me." That's the most important part of the article. Now, when I read that, I realized that Craig Wright had tricked me into competing with him. When I saw that, I knew that that's what he was up to. Now, when I saw "compete with me," I knew that Craig Wright had tricked me into competing with him. Because now that I knew that that was his message, I saw that that's what he had done. And the way that this happened was when I started doing my show. If you look at the end of the Narnia episode, one of the things I say there is that my character is the investor, He's the owner of Bitcoin. And so then I saw Craig Wright's Satoshi thing, and I was like, he is not just going to take over Bitcoin just by pretending to be Satoshi. That is. So then when I heard about Craig Wright and the Satoshi thing, I was like, that is so stupid. I can't believe he's doing that. So I realized I needed to up my game, because I was like, I am not going to just let him take over Bitcoin just by pretending to be Satoshi. So I decided to one-up him there, and that's when I came up with the idea of the Emperor of Bitcoin character, because I thought if there's anyone above Satoshi in the hierarchy, that would be the Emperor of Bitcoin. So that's what Craig Wright wanted. He wanted me to compete with him, and that's what happened. He tricked me. So I was concerned about Craig Wright, because of Mircea Popescu. And I could see that he was powerful because I wanted to imitate him, because he made me want to up my game. And the last powerful person who I thought was more powerful than me really caused a lot of trouble with the ideas he released into Bitcoin. See, he wasn't doing it. He didn't make the BTC cult deliberately, right? It's just you let the idea out, and then it's free, and it transforms like a life form, and you can't control it. So I thought I'll make an episode that is completely inconsistent with me being Craig Wright's cult member. So I made the Groucho episode. So someone going around imagining somebody as Groucho obviously can't be a cult member, right? Because Groucho is a comedy character. Like if you're thinking, you don't want to really follow him. You want to decide whether you go along with anything that he says. And it's comedy because he easily hypnotizes the people on the movie, and they go along with him even if it's ridiculous, and they don't seem to notice that he's kind of out of place in this party. So when I released the video, I got no response, and to me that is the most interesting response, and it's definitely the most intelligent response. So say he said that the video was good and he thought it was funny and he liked it. Well, the real message of the video is that I'm the leader, isn't it? So he couldn't do that. If he did that, that would make it look like he didn't see the real message of the video. And what if he had said that it was bad and he didn't like it? Well, then I would win because of the Barbra Streisand effect, because that would just make my video more popular, and more people would want to call him Groucho. They would want to pass on my joke, right? So Craig Wright didn't say the video was good, and he didn't say the video was bad. And you know what else he didn't do? Block me. So to me, this proves that he can handle ideas that are different from his. And he's not afraid of different ideas, which is what he would be if he was a genuine cult leader. So when Craig Wright blocks you, that means that you've done something that he thinks is too stupid, and he just doesn't have time for it. And this also shows me that Craig Wright understands his own interest, because he knows that he needs to be connected, and he needs to be connected to the most intelligent people. And so he is fine with somebody spending 45 minutes negging him, and he'll still stay connected to that person if he's a good connection. Now, another thing that nchain likes to do is make threats and act tough. And this was something that I always really, really liked about Craig Wright, is his willingness to just be crazy. All of the best Bitcoiners are crazy. So I thought, why does nchain have such complex behavior? Because they've got Craig Wright, who's just acting like a big jerk, and they've got Jimmy Wynn with this very intelligent presentation that was designed with a very high-level understanding of Bitcoin. And the way that I know that is that this presentation has many audiences. It's talking to many different people at the same time. And remember, in Bitcoin, you need to be well connected. So this is a talk that was designed by someone who knows how to be well connected. Because the explicit audience is the miners, and they specifically mention the miners and not the developer groups. They do not talk directly to the developer groups. So who are they ignoring, and who are they explicitly talking to? And this talk is also a message to people outside of Bitcoin. They will see it, and they will not grasp the nuance of what Jimmy Wynn is doing, but they will see that Bitcoin is growing up, and they will see Jimmy Wynn as a normal businessman that they can do business with. And I think another audience of this talk is the Bitcoin investors, because Jimmy Wynn is talking to investors just how they should be talked to. See, he is focusing on what fundamentally matters. He is focused on the most important things. He focuses on the bottom line. Because if you go back to my Narnia episode, remember at the end of that I say I don't want to be a dragon, I want to be Satan. Because dragon is that's a child monster, right? First I say you should want to be a dragon, then I say, well, I'd really rather be someone more like Satan. Well, I think these guys want to be dragons. So when I saw this, I was thinking, geez, what is nchain up to? What are they doing? So why does nchain need such a big brain? Why do they need to be so much ahead of the other miners in terms of brains? And then I was thinking about what I said earlier about miners having a more immediate need to be profitable. I can find the people who are thinking, but I can't force the stupid people to think. Well, if you're a miner, you can't just be stupid. The moment you see someone who has a bigger brain, you have to start thinking about what they know, because you know you can get forced out of the market. Miners get thrown out of business, right? So they have to understand Bitcoin well enough to stay in the game. And if nchain's intelligence level about Bitcoin was massively higher than theirs, then they would have to learn that pretty soon, right? Because everybody else would have to learn it as well. See? And therefore, you can raise the intelligence of the miners much more quickly than you can raise the intelligence of the investors. If you have the biggest brain and you can use your understanding of Bitcoin to be the best miner, you can force all the other miners to understand Bitcoin. So why is a miner plus a brain such a good business model? Because you want to be at the center of the network if you're a miner. You're better off if you're at the center of the network and you're a miner. So, and you need to be good at being in the center. You need to have some minimal level of competency of being in the center, or you're out of business. So, if somebody raises the bar a lot, you know that everybody else is going to have to follow eventually. And if you don't notice, then you don't know what it means to be a miner. How do you get to be good at being in the center of the network? Well, intelligence, just general intelligence, because it is an eternal churning of other brains who are also trying to get to the center. So it's an intelligence contest to be at the center of the network. So once you signal that you're smarter, the other miners have to compete. So this is what I see nchain as doing. They're creating a wake-up call to the miners. They're saying, we have the big brain, and you need to replicate our business model, or else other people will figure out what we've done first. nchain is just showing people that they're more intelligent and watching to see how you react to this, watching to see who understands it first. Craig Wright is putting himself in the position of having to be the greatest economist in history.
A serious large-scale miner will spend well over $100 million setting up a system right now.
Adam Smith sure didn't have hundreds of millions of dollars riding on whether capitalism is true, did he?
You split, we bankrupt you.
And he acts like he really likes to be a jerk. How can he afford to do that? How can he afford to act this way when he needs to be in the center of the network? Because he sees that Bitcoin is in danger.
That miner is going to actually undercut their own incentives.
And everyone needs to behave better.
You split, we bankrupt you.
nchain is saying to the other miners, you'd better understand Bitcoin as well as we do, or we will turn your lack of knowledge against you. And we have a great plan that is in everybody's best interest to follow. All miners who are thinking will see this, and they will also see that they need to replicate nchain's business model. They will see that nchain is raising the bar. So they will want to go with nchain's plan, because it's easier to go along with nchain and learn from them to try to replicate their business model than it is to try to recreate their knowledge. It's so obvious. Why didn't I think of nchain?
That miner is going to actually undercut their own incentives.
How much hashing power do they have? Well, it doesn't matter, because all miners have to start thinking about this now. All miners have to think about Bitcoin, the economic system. All miners have to think about getting transaction fees. All miners have to think about how to fight other miners, because they have to think about, what does nchain really know? nchain is saying, this is the stuff that you need to be thinking about if you're a miner. And now that we said it, you do need to start thinking about it, because everybody who noticed is already thinking about it. Okay? And everyone who is thinking about what it means to be a miner realizes that they have no choice. So now I feel like I really wish I had got into mining. Can you imagine if there was a miner that acted like it thought it was a Stephen King monster and it could just make you hallucinate whatever it wanted? Now, if you watch my episode with Amaury Sachet, he asks me a question at the end of the interview where he says, how are we doing at being Sauron's army? At being Sauron, because he was referencing my show, my episode, Strategy in the Core Cache Conflict. And so he gave me a great compliment there by telling me that he wanted to be what I was saying we needed in that video. So he was acting like I was the leader. So, Amaury saved Bitcoin Cash. So he is always going to be one of the most important Bitcoiners. But I think Craig Wright is going to save it again, and he is the one who knows how to be Sauron. And when I said before that I was looking for a gladiator, I didn't know what that meant exactly. I was talking about it in metaphorical terms. I knew we needed something like that, but I didn't know what it was. Well, I think that nchain is the gladiator that I've been looking for. Before, I was like, where is Satan? Okay? Satan is the person who can cross the Sea of Chaos. So, and what is at the other end of the Sea of Chaos? The Garden of Eden, right? And that is what Bitcoin SV is.
Beware of the blob, it creeps and leaps and glides and slides across the floor, right through the door and all around the wall. A splotch, a blotch, be careful of the blob. Beware of the blob, it creeps and leaps and glides and